lives, we have been told to be afraid to go into the woods. Every bedtime story we're ever read reminds us of the dangers lurking there. When the main character goes into the woods, what happens? Well, take the case of Little Red Riding Hood, the sweet girl who goes to check on her sick grandmother, only to come face first with the big, bad wolf.
Welcome to the Retro21 Studios podcast. I'm your host, M Squared. Today, I'm joined with Jessica DeAngelo. How are you, Jessica?
I'm wonderful. Thanks for having me, Mike.
Oh, absolutely. I'm super excited about this podcast. Jessica DeAngelo is the Chief Hiking Officer and visionary behind Hike to Become, where she guides business leaders to harness the power of nature to unlock their greatest potential. With a background in global sales and strategy, Jessica has traveled the world and worked with top Fortune 500 companies, including Amazon, Nike, and Uber. Through her research, she discovered that breaking free from living on autopilot starts with learning to become powerfully present in nature. Your talk resonated with me in a big way because this is where I need to be. Jessica inspires people to step out of the office and into nature to solve their biggest business challenges and spark their most innovative ideas. In her TEDx Talk, Why We Are Afraid to Walk into the Woods, she reveals that our greatest fears aren't always what they seem, and the only way to uncover them is to take a walk in the woods. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you. Yes, I'm super excited to be here.
Awesome. I was so impressed with your TEDx Talk. And as you're aware, the Retro21 Studios podcast focuses on artificial intelligence. So I was a little bit intimidated by this podcast because it's like two entirely different worlds. When we're talking AI, it's this synthetic realm of robots and computers, and your talk and focuses on, hey, get into the woods. So tell us about your TEDx, what led up to it.
Sure. And it's funny. I love that we're doing this podcast, Mike, because when you initially called me, I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm your ideal guest. I'm like the opposite of what you normally talk about. But I do think it's really relevant because a big part of why we're all feeling so disconnected first to other people in our lives and then ultimately from ourselves, which is what I talk about in the talk, the TEDx talk, is that it's technology. Technology is designed to be addictive. And we're finding ourselves really constantly checking our cell phones. I think this stats were like 2,617 times a day on average. That's bananas.
Wow.
But we're missing a big part of our life in the process. And so how the TEDx, I would say, came about for me personally was a moment that I had with my own kid where my daughter, I was supposed to be playing restaurant and my daughter called me out for, you'll see in the talk, but not ordering the only thing that they had on the menu at the restaurant because I was too distracted on my cell phone.
Mm-hmm.
And building a business or a brand is very difficult. And so I found myself in the same patterns, being a workaholic in my own business that I embraced when I was in corporate. And that really surprised me. So I had to take myself for a hike to figure out the answers.
You mentioned at the beginning some fear doing the podcast. And one of the areas you talk about is, personal growth. And I'm interested in, at least I think the audience is interested in this connection between AI. Where is it leading us to? You're talking about disconnecting from a smart device. And my day-to-day, I mentioned it earlier, is that synthetic space. So can you describe some of the challenges, the dichotomy between the two? How do you find a balance?
So I think, for your audience and you and myself, first to recognize that technology is a tool, but also acknowledging that we humans are not a tool. And I'll frame it up this way. So there's a famous Nobel Prize winning historian, Christian Louis Langa, and he once said, technology makes a useful servant, but a dangerous master. Like this was like in the 1800s, like well before computers, well before iPhones, well before smartwatches. And a big part of me is like, how did he know that we would be sliding into this place where it's questionable who's the tool in the equation? So I agree with you. It's all about balance. And I think remembering boundaries in our life. So I advocate for everyone to participate in this Hike 31 challenge that I've designed And a big part of the practice is literally learning how to leave your cell phone at home. You know, you and I grew up, not to like talk about our ages, but you and I grew up before cell phones. Am I right?
Right. That's
Where like
correct.
I played on a farm on 14 acres barefoot. Like my mom didn't know where I was. Like no one needed a smartwatch on me. I was fine.
That's right.
But now in adult life, we are so addicted to our technology. And I think we need to stop blaming technology. Number one, technology's not, we don't blame technology. We need to take responsibility for ourselves. And what if we could just create a bubble, a 30-minute practice in our day where we can be disconnected, be in movement, be in nature. And the scientific studies behind that will lead us to some of our most creative breakthroughs. But having the discipline to remember that we are not the tool, it's technology, and we can opt to put it down.
Excellent. So Jessica, how do you go about doing that? So I listened to the TEDx. It sounded great. Grab 30 minutes, 31, the challenge is out there. I'm like, well, I always have too much stuff to do. I have to go pick up the kids. We have to go to sporting events. I have work stuff to do. And how did you break that barrier? Because that is a barrier, in my opinion. It may be a bit psychological, right? We've get into these weird patterns. But...
So that is a great question, Mike. And actually, one of my clients asked me more often than not. So funny aside, if clients choose to work with me now, especially like on a one-on-one VIP way where I help clients with their own business strategy or professional strategy, the first thing they're doing is they're signing up for the Hike 31 challenge.
Wow.
And the question that I often get asked, Mike, is just what you said. I'm a busy professional. I have a family of 5 at home. I have no time just in my day to do your silly little challenge. And here is my answer. And my answer is this. When I committed myself to hiking for 31 days straight the last year in January, which is kind of the genesis of this idea, I was raising a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. I was building my own business and brands, and I'm a wife, and I'm a community member, and I'm a mom. Like I'm all the things that you all are.
Right.
So first step is this: be disciplined and just do it. Everybody has 30 minutes in their day. Like I don't care who you are, you do have 30 minutes.
Right.
And I think the other thing is that we need to break down some societal expectations around what we do during our workday. And what I mean by that is even though all of us, not all of us, but a lot of us, in the post-pandemic era are working remote or in some sort of hybrid fashion, and now autonomy is part of our workday, we still don't take advantage of what that means. Here's what I will tell people. If we can carve out just these 30 minutes in our day to go for a walk in nature, unplugged, and I can get into the science about that, why it works a little bit later, but it's going to change your cognitive function. So imagine this. What if I told you by going for a 30-minute walk, you could actually put 2 more hours of productivity into your day? That changes the discussion. And I'll just give you a brief example. On days, and they're rare, when I don't hike, I think in January, like I've only missed 2 days where I haven't gone out for a hike. I find myself not nearly as productive as on the days I do. So if I find myself multitasking and not making any progress at my desk or being focused on what I need to do, I just get up and I go for that walk, and I come back and my list of 45 things to do becomes 3. I only really need to accomplish 3 and do them really well. Way more focused, creative, and productive. And this is not just trust Jess, what Jess says, but it's the science backs it up.
Excellent. So what would you recommend for a person in an urban area? So I'm in the Pacific Northwest, so going out for a hike is walking outside the door and heading to a park. But say someone downtown Chicago or New York, what are your recommendations for that audience?
So a couple of things. First off, we need to reframe what it means to hike. Like when I say hike, let's just have fun with this, Mike. When I say hike to you, tell me what you picture.
Oh, when you say hike to me,
what do you picture?
Oh, my context, again, it's the Pacific Northwest. So there's trees, there's trails, there's some organization to it. So you actually end up going through some of the same planning processes that you go through from a work perspective.
Right. And all of a sudden you're like, wait, I have to scale mountains. I have to find an arduous trail somewhere. I got to get my hiking boots. I got to do all these things. And you're talking yourself out of it. So if we reframe, if we look up the definition of hike, it literally means a walk in the wilderness. And the wilderness means nature. It means places that are untouched by man. To your point, there is a large part of the population that actually, doesn't have trees right out their door. However, the metrics are most people can find a nature place close by within about a 10-minute walk. But what I will tell you is, based on scientific studies, it shows that if you can find a place where you see more, percentage-wise, natural elements than man-made structures, that is just enough.
Right.
So there are times when I only have time to walk out in my neighborhood, and I'm fortunate enough to live in a place that has a trail behind our community. If I'm looking up while I'm walking, I'm seeing the Boise foothills and blue sky. Are there houses? Sometimes, yeah. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing a majority more nature. So it's still working, if that makes sense. So let's reframe what it means to go for a walk. If you can only walk outside, just look up at the sky, keep your head up. Don't look at the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Those nature elements, or find like a tree-lined park.
Wow. So what you're describing is, I guess it's this coexistence. I had this context of, again, being out in the woods. Well, I guess, if you think of New York, there's Central Park. So there are parks,
Yep.
right? So you can make that connection with nature. This is really good stuff. So what are your recommendations? You offer coaching. And so say that person that's completely wound up, such as myself, right? You just have this overloaded schedule. So what's your approach with your secret sauce?
So my secret tips on how to be successful in the Hike 31 challenge is get out first thing in the morning. I myself have 2 toddlers. That is very difficult. But I would tell you that the morning hikes I do make my whole day way more productive. It's a little bit trickier. And then if you miss that morning window, do your lunch break. And actually, if you can hike or walk like right after you eat your lunch, that's going to stabilize your blood sugar and all like in 10 minutes. So it's great from a health perspective too. But what I'm most focused on is the change in your cognitive behavior and just getting 30 minutes. So there are times where I don't get out until 8 or 9 p.m. at night. And that's after my kids are in bed. But if I haven't hiked that day, I'm still getting out because I need it for my own sanity, for my best ideas, for a moment of peace with myself. And ultimately, what I talk about in the TEDx is we use this practice to develop a relationship with ourselves again.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some of and keep your sneakers or hiking boots or whatever right by the door.
Keep them by the door.
Guilty every time you walk out the door. But I do have a whole system set up that anyone who wants to sign up for the Hike 31 challenge, it's simple. They can send a text to 33777 and just the word hike, HIKE, and they'll get inputted into the hike challenge where they can start practicing on their own, and they'll get emails from me and prompts from me reminding them how beneficial this practice is.
So that was
33777 is the number to text to, and then just text the word hike, HIKE.
Got it. I'm a technology guy, so I'm a little slow. When we started this podcast, I mentioned this synthetic world and some of the conflicts with nature and in our work lives, this technological work life. But what I'm hearing is more of a coexistence.
Absolutely. Well, I advocate to put the cell phones away. They are very useful tools and we need it to be productive.
Mm-hmm.
I think, Mike, and I'm curious your thoughts because you are very much in this AI space. I am not. However, I think the biggest danger right now is that we're forgetting our humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And we're forgetting how creative we can ultimately be without any of these tools. That is the big danger I'm sensing. And even people like Steve Jobs were famous for going for walks outside barefoot, by the way, and embracing the walking motion, which creates a bilateral stimulation, being in nature, and then getting out from our offices or behind our desks and computers. So I think we just need to be very mindful that there is something at stake here, and it's us, and ultimately our creativity that isn't plugged in. We can't lose that in the process of using tech as a tool.
That's true. And I do think there is some danger. We talked about the balance and which way is it tilting. And so as we become more reliant on AI, in many cases, we're not aware of how it's impacting our lives. You're using a call center, you're calling about a product or just day-to-day activities, AI is likely incorporated into that process. And from a technological perspective, the reliance is becoming heavier and heavier. But I think we do, in fact, need to be mindful of our humanity. If we're not in balance, I think we're in trouble.
I think so. I mean, AI is just, it kind of feels a little bit like the wild, wild west in my
Hmm.
perspective. I mean, yes, I've used ChatGPT and some other tools, but what's interesting, or an interesting phenomenon I'm seeing, and I don't know if you're seeing it, but it's very apparent to me right now in social media. People are using these tools like
Hmm.
perhaps too much to write their entire posts or things like that. I think there was a recent announcement by Meta about incorporating more like thought into Facebook and Instagram algorithms and
Right.
ending that so it will increase participation. But at what point does humanity and authenticity kind of like rise to the top? And
Hmm.
I personally am being drawn much more towards the human posts and ones that
Hmm.
are authentic. So it's interesting. I'm also, much like you, sitting back and watching all of this transpire and going, well, isn't this, yes, it's a tool, but like, let's not take it too far.
Can you distinguish between the two? So you read an article. My wife, she read an article the other day and she's like, this was totally AI generated. It missed so many of the nuances. What's your thought?
I mean, well, first off, Jen's brilliant. Your wife is brilliant. So she would know for sure. Yeah, my thought is I'm definitely picking up on it more and more because
Hmm.
as a user of the tools myself, I'm noticing things that the tool inherently does to make it seem more human, more friendly, more authentic. And it actually is giving it, I would say, markers for me to be like, oh, that was AI generated, that a human wouldn't write it like that. So yeah, I'm
Hmm.
noticing more and more.
In preparation for the podcast, I pulled up Chat GPT, and I use a variety of tools just for podcast purposes, for comparative analysis. Right now, the big conversation is around DeepSeek, but I'm often on Chat GPT just because I'm familiar with the tool. I've gotten accustomed to it, but there's others. Occasionally, I'll go to Gemini. But my point is, at the beginning of this podcast, and it's perhaps because that's my world, I put in your TEDx Talk, I put in my Retro21 Studios podcast and prompted GPT to come up with an agenda, come up with questions. And it was just super easy for me. The good part, if there's a positive there, it saved time. So it's a
Right.
productivity boost. But also, I have the ability to go in and review the material. Do I agree with it? Is it off base? And if so, I get course correct. And that's one of the dangers, I think, of a lot of the tools coming out where folks are not in tune with the technology, that it's not the end all as far as the answers that come back. They may be off base. And so how do you discern whether or not you have accurate information? So you pull something that's mission critical or life critical, and then you run with it, and there may be a consequence to that.
For sure. Yeah. And I'm curious, what did you think of the questions that ChatGPT came up for us? Did it feel like it was what you would want to ask me? Or was it like percentage wise, how off base was it in your opinion?
It wasn't off base at all. The big question that I didn't factor in was querying you beforehand, like what's your maturity level in AI? So that's a big area of focus for me when you're having the conversations, and that's true of any discipline. Like, okay, I'm talking to a construction manager. I know nothing about construction, so based on my maturity level, he has to keep it at a certain level.
Right.
So in this particular instance, the answers were fairly solid. The tools are getting a lot better. And I will actually read a couple of the questions. It says, how did your personal experiences inspire the themes in your TEDx talk? In your opinion, why do humans instinctively fear the unknown? So I thought that was a really good
That is a
question.
good question. Yeah.
And doesn't that tie into you talked about the bear?
Yeah, I do. And in the beginning of the TEDx talk, so I'll answer the question, thank you, ChatGPT, via mic, on why do humans instinctively fear the unknown? And so in the beginning of the TEDx talk, I discussed this a little bit. When we're children and being put to bed at night, think about the stories that we're told. We're told the story of Goldilocks and Hansel and Gretel and Little Red Riding Hood. And like every interaction these little children have in the woods is somewhat terrifying and you might get eaten. So it's natural that I think, and we also, the fear of the unknown somehow seems to be tied up into going into the woods somehow. And so I explore that in the talk. But I think what I uncover and sort of towards the end of the talk is why are people hesitant to do the Hike 31 challenge? we tell ourselves we're too busy, but the reality is there's something unknown about ourselves that we are avoiding.
That's fantastic. We talked about fear of the unknown. Can you share an example of how confronting a personal fear led to growth or transformation?
Yeah, I mean, really, for me, it was the moment that I was confronted with not being present by my own children was really impactful for me. And it forced me to go on this really cold winter morning hike, December 23rd, like 2023, by myself. I was the only car in the parking lot. And it forced me to hike up the side of the mountain and really look at myself, just like I described. I think a lot of times we're avoiding intuitively what we already know about ourselves and our situation. But we just don't give ourselves time or space to think about it or process it or come to a conclusion
Mhm.
or answers. And so just me going on that first hike changed everything. I wouldn't be sitting here on a podcast with you today. I wouldn't have been on a TEDx stage had I not embraced the fact that I was uncomfortable with the way my life was playing out. I knew something needed to change,
Mhm.
know the how. So I went for a hike. I mean, it's sort of crazy, but that really forced me to look at all the things I was wrestling with.
That's awesome. And from a receptivity perspective, so how is it going? So you're interacting with executives and other folks, and what is their experience? What's some of the feedback?
Yeah. Oh, I love this question so much because I really believe my work is not about me at all. Actually, I'm a guide and my work is about the people that I can create these experiences for. So, how's it going? It's getting more and more interesting, Mike, as more people find out about my work and my approach. I'm having a wider variety of clientele, which is amazing.
Hmm.
But for the most part, I answer this a couple ways. First, like, what are individuals experiencing if they come hiking with me and work on a strategic plan? And the biggest thing I can share is they're experiencing these profound moments of clarity.
Hmm.
I've developed a whole method under Hype to Become because my background is in business strategy. I've worked on some incredible partnerships and collaborations in my career. So I know the right questions to ask someone to lead them down the path, metaphorically, as we are actually on the path, around designing the life they want to live, being present, but also not everything is about how much money you can make. Time, not money, is actually the ultimate commodity. My clients are experiencing profound moments of clarity on the trail. And then when I work with groups, it's sort of something different.
Here's another question that was generated by a chat GPT, and it's related to AI learning and uncertainty. And it says, in your talk, you mentioned that our greatest fears may not be what they seem. How does this align with AI systems misinterpreting inputs or making errors due to insufficient context? Does that question make any sense?
I'm really gonna have to think about it for a minute.
That's when I would recast that question
Yeah,
in
that
a
one's a
different way.
little too wordy, and I feel like it goes in two different directions. I'm not sure.
So let's see,
How would you rephrase it? I
if
guess.
I was to rephrase it, I like the first part. In your talk, you mentioned that our greatest fears may not be what they seem. And so I would rephrase it. The second part, how does this align with the current perceptions around AI? There's fear that AI is going to take over the world. We're going to lose jobs as a result of AI. Jeffrey Hinton talked about bad actors, of which I don't think that was resolved. So there's a lot of fear and uncertainty, and it ties back to the unknown. Where are we going with this? So that's how I would
Yeah.
recharacterize or rephrase the question.
So I love that question. Your reinterpretation of it is beautiful. So here's how I would answer it around in my TEDx talk. I discussed that oftentimes people will think that they don't want to go hiking alone because they're scared of bears, because they're scared of getting lost, because they're scared of, I don't know, any of those things, maybe, getting poison ivy, who knows? But the reality, or what I find in my TEDx talk, not to get away the punchline here, but is that actually most people are afraid of being alone with their own thoughts and what that might reveal to them.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, with I think a lot of the fears are tied up in looking at the wrong thing. What if AI takes our jobs? What if AI becomes like iRobot? And wasn't it like a Will Smith movie
Right.
where the robots become smarter and try to like kill humanity? I don't really remember. that. I think we're looking at the wrong problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the right problem we should be paying attention to is how do we maintain that balance and make sure that AI or technology in general remains a tool, and in the process, we don't lose our humanity. What no one is really talking about is we're not talking about fear of losing our humanity. And what I mean by that is embracing our own sense of creativity and our own best ideas and being innovative just in our brains without any tools.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can lose that along the process.
Absolutely.
Because that's really important. I mean, Albert Einstein, look at the theory of relativity. Rumor has it that a lot of that came to him when he was walking around lakes on his property.
Mm.
He didn't have AI inputs. We can't lose that beauty that we all intuitively have if we're just busy putting in AI input. So it's about.
I had no idea that this would go to where you're leveraging Einstein. That's awesome. Just looking at the next question here, and I think you just answered it. What lessons from your talk could help alleviate these fears? And those fears, of course, are related to AI.
I think remembering what's important in life is really the basis of my talk. I mean, if you peel back all the layers and the stories, and what I'm actually trying to teach people is how to show up and be powerfully present in their own life. And that means that you're not on your cell phone while you're having dinner with your spouse. And it means, you're not answering work emails while you're supposed to be playing with your kids. I think that is just the most important piece, is remembering that if we don't look up from our technology and our tools and our widgets and posting on social media constantly, we're going to miss the most important moments in life. Like, by the way, I almost did in, playing with my children that one morning. That was such a big wake up call for me.
The next question, let's see. How do you think storytelling, like in your TEDx talk, can bridge the gap between public fear and AI and its potential benefits?
I think sharing stories where the outcomes of using AI have been purely for positive and good and maybe enhancing our own intuitive creativity and drive and all of that, versus I think in a lot of ways, media tends to only go to the negatives. And I think using more storytelling around how using AI led to some very positive outcomes could be super beneficial for people to hear and think about how to embrace it. Like you were saying earlier on in the talk, with boundaries and guardrails of double checking, is this the right inputs? Are these the right responses versus just cut and paste and let's go on our way?
Excellent. Your talk touches on self-awareness and introspection. How important is it for AI systems to understand human emotion and context, especially when making decisions that affect people's lives?
Well, I don't know if I can answer this one. This one feels like very wrapped up in so different.
It is fairly loaded.
This is like a loaded question that I'm like, wait, where's my PR person? Oh, wait, it's me.
That's right.
Yeah, I don't know if I can answer it because I don't think AI can ever fully understand human emotions. That's the difference between us and technology. So I think that's a dangerous, borderline ethical, questionable place to go, is how far do we want to go with it?
Right. Through the hikes, you're helping to open pathways, helping folks with their level of productivity. Do you take it a step deeper and get into some of these areas and offer advice? It doesn't have to be AI, but just that greater connectedness with the human experience.
So what I find, a couple of things. So first, I'm getting people out of the office, changing the scenery. Second, at the trailhead, spoiler alert, I steal their cell phones and their smartwatches, and no, they don't need to know how many steps they're taking with me because they're going to do the steps anyway. And so I get people kind of stripped down to what is their humanity without all the distractions. And then we spend time in nature, which studies about the Japanese art of forest bathing called Shinrin-yoku shows that when you immerse yourself in nature, it reduces your stress and anxiety and enhances your emotional well-being. And then you have the change in cognitive function, like I was discussing. So when I do client hikes, I make sure we pass all those thresholds so that whether it's an individual or a group, they're getting all of those benefits. But then once that cognitive function really starts shifting and changing, that's when I come in with my methodology that I developed with Hike to Become around asking very important questions around what's the life they want to lead, what's the business they want to build, what's their big why. And what's different about me as a business consultant is I care about designing the strategy for the human being, not the business first. Because at the end of the day, if the human being isn't happy, the business isn't thriving. So I take a different approach. But I think the other thing that's a bit unique, Mike, is that we are also in movement, getting that bilateral stimulation, which balances the right and left hemispheres of your brain. So it's kind of like this yummy mix of like nothing I'm doing is novel or new. We've actually have been doing this like all of humanity. Only in recent years, though, that we feel we can only be productive behind our desks and we're actually missing out on our most productive and creative times. So I'm just changing the game and switching up the way we do it. And the results are mind blowing.
That's awesome. Earlier, you mentioned Steve Jobs, and Steve Jobs would take these walks, and you said, and he would walk barefoot. Is there something unique about barefoot walking?
Yes, there is. So being barefoot on any natural surface, so think like gravel, grass, anything like that, is actually producing a grounding effect with the earth. And this is actually, I'm so glad we're getting into this. Great question. We are kind of in today's day and age. I mean, so I think about my office right here, Mike. I have a computer in front of me. I have a laptop over here. I have my cell phone. It's shut off. I have a microphone. So all of this is emitting like, waves and different things that are causing a lot of free radicals, and our bodies feel constantly in that fight or flight mode, right? We aren't supposed to be in a place where we have all of this floating around. When we walk around barefoot, like Steve did, if you're on natural surfaces, it's creating a grounding effect where it's connecting you directly with the earth's energy. And it's neutralizing your body to be in a very even keel place. I take it so far, Mike. So I run around barefoot with my toddlers all summer long. We're gardening in the back. Like we're barefoot all day, just like I was when I was a kid. So the main benefit of grounding is it drastically reduces inflammation in your body. And I mean, the basis of most inflammation or most diseases is inflammation. So I actually took it so far that my husband and I sleep on grounding sheets at night.
Oh, wow.
We've never slept so well in our life. It's like what my big splurge for Christmas, Mike, was I said to my husband, I was like, we're getting grounding sheets. He's like, what now? And I was like, let's just try it. We've never slept so well. So yes, if you can get outside, dip your toes in the dirt, the mud, the sand, the gravel, doesn't matter. You'll get some amazing grounding benefits as well.
So a little bit of a spoiler, Jen, my wife, is a huge fan of the barefoot grounding exercises, and my daughter as well. So
I'm not surprised at that in the least. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Jessica, it's been a pleasure. This was a really cool podcast. And tell us what's next for you.
Yeah. So I'm actually working on finishing my book. It should be published this year. I cannot release the title quite yet, but I will tell you the basis of the book is why we need to get outside more, and how it's going to make us more focused, productive, and creative, and how we need to shed some old societal rules around you can only be productive behind a computer screen. So I'm really excited. There'll be some great hiking and backpacking stories, some things that I've done with my clients and the benefits they're seeing. And so that's my big project moving forward. And I'm just really excited about that.
Excellent. And again, how can folks get in touch with you?
Sure. So they can find me on my website. It's Jessica DeAngelo, firstnamelasting.com. Also, I'm very active on LinkedIn, so they can find me there. And then again, if anyone wishes to participate in the Hike 31 challenge or sign up for prompts from me just about how being in nature is really beneficial, they can text HIKE, HIKE, to 33777.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And as a parting note, I'd love to follow up with you because I am working on an exercise around AI maturity, and just this conversation and listening to your TEDx talk, I think a lot of what you described can be incorporated in a variety of ways into the maturity model. And so I'd love your feedback and input.
For sure. And I'd be absolutely honored. Thanks for reaching out to me and sharing your listeners with me today, Mike. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining the Retro21 Studios podcast. I'm your host, M Squared. Take care.